Impossible. Bern is losing to a 13-year-old nobody. Those were the words, whispered by spectators watching young Bobby Fischer take on 25-year-old Donald Bern, a college professor, a former US Open champion, and one of the most respected chess players in the US. And this was the 1956 Rosenwald Memorial, a tournament where the highest-rated chess players in the US played, and also a tournament in which spectators were allowed to get real close to the chess games being played. It was Fischer's first invitational and all-adult Masters tournament, and he was struggling, but getting stronger each round. On the other hand, in this tournament, Bern had already defeated Grandmaster Samuel Olszewski, the strongest American chess player at that time, and it must have been quite an amazing experience for Fischer to be playing Bern, someone who Fischer only learned about from studying his games in chess books and magazines. This meant that Fischer was aware of what openings Bern preferred, and Fischer decided to, as we will see, eventually transpose into the Grunfeld defense, an opening that Fischer was still in the process of fully learning and mastering, and we will see that this caused Fischer extreme time pressure because he had to find the moves on his own. Before we begin looking at this wonderful game, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button below this video. Okay, now we turn our attention to the game. The game started out with knight f3. Bern is developing the knight, controlling the e5 square, and therefore stopping black from playing e5. This is the third most popular way to open up the game, and beyond just being a very good developing move, it's also a stalling and flexible move. White wants to keep his options open, waiting to see what black plays before deciding which opening to get into. The position can transpose into many different openings. Knight f6. Fischer also plays the flexible move, keeping the position symmetrical and stopping the immediate e4. This is also the most popular way of responding to knight f3, and even the great Garry Kasparov preferred to respond like this. c4. Fighting for the d5 square and opening up the diagonal for the queen. This is a transposition to the English opening, but only briefly, as we will see. g6. Fischer is planning to put his dark square bishop on the long diagonal. Knight c3. Bern develops his other knight. Bishop g7. Fischer is ready to castle even if none of his central pawns control the center. So what is Fischer's big idea? Well, after World War I, a new school of chess was developed. And by school of chess, of course, I mean a new way of thinking about chess. It was called hypermodern chess. And the basic idea was that a large pawn center could be a liability instead of an asset. We can use distant pieces, like for example a bishop on g7, to indirectly control the center, and at the right moment, we will target our opponent's center. Bern continued to strengthen his center with his pawns. d4. Fischer brought his king to safety with castle kingside, and here Bern played bishop f4. But this game could have easily been a King's Indian, which is another hypermodern opening if e4 was played. For example, e4, d6, bishop e2, e5, and this would have been the main line of the King's Indian defense. Bishop f4. This move was played almost certainly by Bern with the intention of getting into lines that would be more unfamiliar for Fischer. And Fischer responded with the transposition to the Grunfeld defense with the move d5. Now, the Grunfeld defense can be classified as a counterattacking opening. It began to be played at the highest level in the 1920s and 1930s as a result of the hypermodern movement. Since that time, many world-class champions have deployed the Grunfeld, including Botnik, Smyslov, and Kasparov. In this position, Bern played queen b3, bringing out the queen a bit too early. Queen b3 is a fairly rare move in this specific Grunfeld variation. Much more popular would have been rook c1 or e3. But when you're trying to put your opponent on unfamiliar territory, a move like this can sometimes do the trick. D takes e4. Fischer takes advantage of the fact that the e-pawn has not moved yet. Bern would prefer to be able to capture the c4 pawn with his bishop which would have allowed him to take back the pawn and at the same time develop his bishop. But instead he has to move his queen again, a second time, which costs him precious time he could have used to develop his position. Queen takes c4. Now white does have a threat, and that threat is the c7 pawn, which is being attacked by the queen and the bishop, and only defended by our queen. c6. Fischer moves his pawn to a square where it is well protected and where it helps control the d5 square. e4. Byrne now controls and occupies the center with his two most central pawns. Knight bd7. Although Fischer cannot develop his knight to the ideal c6 square, he does have knight b6, which is a tempo move against the queen on c4. The reason players are advised not to develop their queen so early is to avoid helping their opponents develop with attacks like this. Queen d1, strengthening the central d pawn. Knight b6, here we see it, attacking the queen, which for the third time in 10 moves will have to move. Queen c5, bringing the queen to safety. Bishop g4, attacking and pinning the knight. Bishop g5, also attacking the knight. This is not an ideal move, both from the perspective of development, because the same piece is being moved twice, and from the perspective of tactics, as we will see in a second. Byrne has neither castled nor developed his light square bishop. He should have played bishop e2 instead. But now the fireworks began, because Fischer played an absolutely brilliant move. Knight a4, attacking the queen. At this time, the spectators could be heard whispering, "What is he doing? Is this a blunder or a sacrifice?" We can see that the knight can take on a4, but this was no blunder. White's c3 knight protects the e4 pawn, which holds white's position together in an important way. So what happens if white takes the undefended knight? Let's look at that. Knight takes a4. White is now up a whole knight. Knight takes e4, taking a pawn and forking the queen and bishop at the same time. If white does nothing, we simply take the queen on c5. We will look at two different attempts by white here. First, let's look at queen takes e7, which captures the pawn and moves the queen out of danger. Here, the simple knight takes g5 maintains a complete advantage for black, but there's an even better move. Queen a5 check, attacking the king, the knight, and the bishop. b4, remember that the b4 pawn is protected by the queen. Queen takes a4, queen takes e4. At this point, white is up a minor piece. We can see that we have two bishops, while black has two bishops and a knight. But that does not matter, because we have the continuation rook fe8, attacking the pinned queen, and if bishop e7 blocking the attack, we have bishop takes f3, g takes f3, the e7 bishop is pinned. If it moves, we take the queen on e4. So what do we do to a pinned piece? We attack it. Bishop f8. And black is going to go on to win this game. The initiative will be too much. Black has a solid pawn structure. White's pawn structure is busted and weak. Black has a safe king. White has a king that will be easily bullied with the board being open and the queen, rooks, and bishop having open lines. Now let's look at bishop takes e7. Bishop e7. We're still attacking the white queen, but now white is attacking our queen as well. The easiest move to understand in this position is knight takes c5. Engines may favor queen c7 just slightly more, but knight takes c5 is excellent. Knight takes c5, bishop takes d8, both queens are off the board, material is equal after knight takes a4, bishop g5, and here engines will go back and forth between two or three different moves, but the easiest continuation that wins for black is bishop takes f3, g takes f3, knight takes b2. Black is up a pawn, and white's pawn structure is shattered. Complete advantage for black. Now let's look at what Byrne actually played. Queen a3. bringing the queen to safety and not taking Fischer's bait. Knight takes c3, taking white's important and better knight. B takes c3, knight takes e4. Now Fischer is up a pawn, but his e-pawn is hanging, being attacked by bishop and queen and only defended by his queen. So Byrne played bishop takes e7. Taking a pawn back, material is even. This move also forks the queen and rook. And if Fischer does nothing except move his queen out of the way, Byrne can win the exchange by taking that rook. Fischer played queen b6. Now Byrne can take the rook, but he doesn't. Let's look at why. Bishop takes f8. And the following is one variation of the kinds of possibilities available if white gets greedy by taking that rook. Bishop takes f8, queen has to move, queen b3. There's multiple ways of playing this position correctly. We can even exchange queens, but one non-engine idea that works well is knight takes c3. If queen takes c3, we of course have bishop b4 pinning the queen. Queen takes b6, a takes b6. The d1 rook is still under attack. Rook a1. Taking the a2 pawn would allow white counterplay with ideas such as bishop c4 and knight e5, targeting the f7 pawn. Bishop takes f3, g takes f3, bishop a3. Notice how if white was to allow us to play bishop d2, we would be trapping the rook. King d2, creating an escape square for the rook. Bishop b2, rook e1, knight d5. And black will start to pick off white's weak pawns. Note also that bishop c3 allows us to win the exchange by taking white's d1 rook. Now let's look at what Byrne actually played. Bishop c4. Finally, on move 15, Byrne develops his bishop. Knight takes c3. Fischer's rook and knight can be taken, but Fischer has a winning position. We saw what happens if the rook is taken. What happens if white takes the knight? Knight takes c3, rook a e8, and we take the bishop on e7. If white tries queen a3, we have ideas of playing queen d8, attacking the pinned bishop. Byrne played bishop c5, attacking the queen. Rook fe8, check. King f1. Note that knight e5 would not have worked. So if knight e5, we would have bishop takes e5, bishop takes b6, taking our queen. But we would have bishop d6, opening up a check on the king. And after the king moves, we would have bishop takes a3, taking white's queen. At around this point in the game, Fischer was dealing with some time trouble. Fischer had just made his 16th move. He had 20 minutes on the clock and needed to make the remaining 24 moves in order to get to move 40 so that additional time would be added to his clock. Fischer needed to play very quick, but the time trouble did not prevent him from playing brilliantly and producing this masterpiece of a game. Byrne played king f1, and here Fischer played the insane looking bishop e6, completely ignoring the attack on the queen and probably even hoping that Byrne would take the queen. And Byrne did take the queen. Bishop takes b6. Bishop takes c4. Fischer takes back some material. King g1. Here Fischer deployed the windmill tactic to capture a pawn and reposition his knight back to the ideal c3 square. So let's look at how that went. Bishop e2 check, king f1, knight takes d4 check, king g1, knight e2 check, king f1, knight c3 check, king g1, a takes b6. Here Fischer takes Byrne's bishop and attacks the queen. Our knight is protected by the dark squared bishop. Remember that white cannot just play a move like queen c1 to protect the rook because of the knight fork. So Byrne plays queen b4, attacking the b6 pawn and the c4 bishop. Rook a4, attacking the queen and also protecting our bishop. Queen takes b6. Knight takes d1. Now Fischer is up a minor piece. Byrne could have resigned here or even many moves back, but he does the class act and allows young Fischer to have his brilliancy game played out till the end. h3. The rook has to be developed somehow. The idea is to play king h2 and open up the rank for the rook. Rook takes a2, taking back even more material. King h2. Knight takes f2, taking another pawn back. There isn't much for Byrne to do with his rook. Fischer will probably be looking to play a move like bishop d5 to take the knight, which is serving a very defensive role for the king. Rook e1. Rook takes e1. Queen d8 check. Bishop f8. Knight takes e1. Bishop d5. Attacking the g2 pawn. Knight f3. Everything wins for black, but Fischer played knight e4, positioning his knight to a better square. Queen b8, b5. Everything is protected, and the light square bishop is doing a wonderful job holding the position together. h4, trying to find any counterplay. h5, stopping any counterplay. Knight e5. King g7, getting out of the pin by the queen, and therefore freeing the dark square bishop. King g1, getting the king out of the potential bishop d6 pin. Bishop c5 check. King f1. King h2 would have fallen for the pin I just mentioned. Fischer actually has a mate in 5 here. Knight g3 check. Rook f2 check would have also worked. From here, all the moves will be completely forced. King e1, bishop b4 check, and actually rook e2 check or bishop b3 would have made it even faster, but would perhaps not have been as pretty as the checkmate we are about to see. King d1, bishop b3, king c1, knight e2 check, king b1, knight c3, king c1, rook c2, checkmate. Bishop a3 would have been checkmate as well. At this point, Byrne stood up and shook Fischer's hand. Some of the spectators applauded this game, annoying the other players who were playing their own games. History was made. Hans Mock, the arbiter and internationally known theoretician, dubbed this game as the game of the century, and the game appeared in newspapers throughout the United States and in magazines throughout the world. 13-year-old Fischer was on the chess map. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.